Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on it's a lovely Friday where Volker is. It's a rainy Friday where I am. So we'll talk a little bit about the weather all across Maryland for a second. But thank you for joining us for another installment of our Fermented Fridays conversations. This one is going to be a great one. I'm joined by Volker Stewart of the Brewers Art located in Baltimore City. I'm really excited to have this conversation with Volker. He and I have known each other for several years, and I really am excited about all of the great stuff that they're doing there in Baltimore. It's been kind of a hectic few months for everybody. We all know that. The Brewers Art is no exception right now, and we'll let Volker talk about that a little bit while we have this afternoon's discussion. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to drop them into the comments section here. We will address those, answer them, and hopefully have a great conversation for you. This weekend, Maryland's breweries are open for business, both for carryout, curbside pickup, delivery. Some breweries may be shipping right now, and some breweries are open for outdoor service. So be sure to check with your favorite local brewery to see what they have available. And we've updated a resource on the Brewers Association of Maryland website with some help of our friend Kendrick Doolin at the marylandcraftbeer.net. He has set up a wonderful table that has information about all of the retail options for breweries throughout the state. So check there if you have any questions, and make sure you show some love to Kendrick and his project. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Volker Stewart. Volker, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jim, and hello, Maryland. As he mentioned, we have a beautifully sunny day in Baltimore City right now, but that might change before too long. So I know it's rainy out there in Frederick, Jim.
The sunlight is beautiful, and it looks wonderful in your office there. So
it feels pretty good. A little on the toasty side, but that's all right.
There you are. So let's jump right into this. The Brewers Art is one of the longest, oldest extant breweries in the state of Maryland right now.
We've been around for close to 24 years now. So it's it feels like 2 years at some points, and it feels like 50 years at other points. So
I remember.
I think there are two other licenses out there that predate us, or three actually: Brewers Alley in Frederick, Oliver's Brewing, and Heavy Seas.
And then Duclaw came right after you, right?
I'm sorry.
Duclaw
like
right after
us. Yeah, their initial brew pub up in downtown Bel Air. Yeah. I
recall when I was working for Brewers Alley, we had our 21st anniversary, and we had you and Hugh there, and we had some folks from Duclaw and Oliver. It was great because we got to celebrate kind of this year of everybody coming of age.
Yeah, indeed. Finally old enough to drink our own product. Yeah.
So what I've always found fascinating about the Brewers Art is your approach to beer seems to be very well rooted in European styles. And I would really like to know kind of if that was the philosophy from the beginning and how it's endured so well in a marketplace that seems to be changing so rapidly.
Well, when we opened up in 1996, the niche we kind of carved for ourselves was Belgian influenced beers. At the time, we already had an amazing German lager brewery. We had a great American ale brewery, and we had a great English style brewery in the city. And we thought, well, there's nobody that's really doing this in this area. Certainly I had been influenced by the likes of Pierre Celis and the folks in New Belgium. But we thought we could really bring something new to the table. What happened was that over the years, people kind of pigeonholed us as exclusively a Belgian brewery. And there's still some people out there who will try, say, one of our lagers and say, well, what's so Belgian about this? And, obviously we have expanded our horizons a little bit, but we do look very much to the old world malts, old world hops. And from time to time, we'll do something that's a little more trendy, a little more, to the current taste. But overall, I think we're sticking to our guns and kind of doing what we've been doing well for over 2 decades now.
I think that's very, I don't think admirable is the right word, but I think that there's something great about that, is that you get to carry on the heritage of what you started doing, and you're continuing that into the modern lexicon of what American beer really is. I think a lot of people who are approaching beer now have caught onto the wave kind of at its peak, which is wonderful. But they don't necessarily realize that craft beer was rooted in trying to not necessarily recreate great beer from around the world, but to make great beer in America that resembled what beer drinkers around the world had found to be the best beers for generations.
Indeed. One of the reasons I didn't have a big objection to being pigeonholed as sort of a Belgian style brewery is that I always felt that given some of the other brewing cultures, especially, say, for example, the German brewing culture, I grew up in Germany. I was certainly influenced by the very specific sort of schools of thought that are in Germany. But places like Belgium had a little bit more of a anything goes ethos, I guess. And really, it was that influenced us here as much as anything else, that we didn't really want to be constrained too much by what in the 90s in many instances were still sort of the accepted norms for brew pubs or even small production breweries. You know, when I started getting into craft beer in the United States in the late 80s while I was in college in California, it was sort of there was the standard of, well, you have to have a pale ale, you have to have a golden ale, you have to have a red ale, and you have to have either a porter or a stout. And that was kind of what you saw at probably 75-80% of all the breweries that were out there. And I remember talking to someone out west and saying what we wanted to do with the brew pub when we opened here, and they kind of looked at me and were like, how are you gonna make it? How are you gonna make it with that kind of stuff? And they just couldn't wrap their head around going into things that weren't the traditional craft beers or microbrews as they were still called at the time. So yeah, I mean, I definitely embraced trying new things. Most of the times, if we went in a new direction, it worked out pretty well. Of course, once in a blue moon, we'd make one and it was like, okay, first and last time for this one. But thankfully, that didn't happen too often.
Did you see any challenges introducing Baltimore and Maryland drinkers to these Belgian styles? I mean, was there any like pushback to it when you first started opening the brand and kind of developing it there in the city, or did people seem receptive?
People were surprisingly receptive. When we started plotting the brands that we were making here on Charles Street, the initial idea was that we were going to make sort of a Belgian pale ale, and that was going to be the flagship, and people were just going to drink that, and everything else was just going to be fun, things that we wanted to make. Strangely enough, the beer that people embraced was sort of an Abbey-style double, which kind of blew our mind. We didn't expect it to be as popular as it was, but it to this day, it's our most popular beer. It's a Resurrection. Yeah, I mean, people really embraced it. People kind of welcomed the fact that we were complementing the amazing, American ales you could get at Sisson's, or at that point it was actually Clipper City already. Shifted over to Clipper City, and the English ales, which was at that time what Oliver's was still doing. Of course, their business model shifted a little bit as well. The lagers, when I moved here in '91, there was one of the best lager breweries in the United States, in my opinion, in the Baltimore Brewing Company downtown, and it kind of stirred my German blood a little bit that someone was able to do it so well here. But the fact that people embraced us as a pub and also as a line of beers, and specifically embraced the Resurrection, popular wisdom 2 years earlier probably would have said, forget it, it's never going to happen. And so I was pleasantly surprised that the Baltimore did embrace us. And I mean, everybody knows Baltimore's kind of a quirky place, and I think that maybe helped them embrace the quirky beers a little bit.
So how about the concept that you have for the restaurant Brewers Art with the brewery? I mean, it's a brew pub. It's kind of, a big package. I think that a lot of beer drinkers may know the Brewers Art through your beer more so than coming to the pub. I'm not sure about that, but that's kind of my gut reaction. I don't think that I knew when I first moved to Maryland that you were a brew pub, but I saw Resurrection everywhere and I knew it was a wonderful beer. I'm wondering, how did you come up with a concept to match the restaurant with the style of beer that you were presenting?
Well, that actually was something that was very fluid. When the initial partners and I started planning for a pub, we were thinking of something much more like a Belgian cafe, where you had like some some light fare, and a nice array of beers. And as we sort of navigated the laws of the time of requirements for getting a liquor license, requirements for zoning to have a brewery in 1990s zoning, it was still seen by the zoning code at that time as something very industrial. So finding that right balance took us about 2 years to find a place that we could actually have a brewery in, that was on the right side of the law, I guess. As it would happen, that place was a historic building. We're in a building that was built at the turn of the last century. We're also very close to the stages. We're close to the Symphony Hall. We're close to the Opera House, Center Stage, and several other theater stages are around the corner. So that kind of pushed the restaurant side of our operation into something maybe a little more upscale than was traditionally seen as brew pub fare, if you will. That being said, we also like to keep things a little bit simple for the bar areas. So there's always sort of this dichotomy between the more upscale dining that you could get in either the dining room or the bars, or the folks that just wanted to come in and get a plate of rosemary garlic fries and a couple of resurrections to wash it down. The space itself has several distinct areas, which is in some ways a blessing, in some ways a curse. A curse mostly from the logistical side, but a blessing in that it gives us a couple of different experiences that you can have here. If you're looking for, like I said, a plate of fries and a glass of resurrection and a dimly lit corner in the basement, we can do that for you. If you're looking to have a nice 3 or 4 course meal in the dining room before a show, we can absolutely do that for you as well. Definitely the initial menus we did were very Belgian, French, German influenced. Over the years, as chefs have changed, we've gone in a couple different directions, but I think we've kind of settled into our, continental / American fare with some fun twists.
There's nothing quite like a great selection of food to pair beautifully with great beer. And we're getting some comments here that people are saying that the food's almost as great as the beer. So I can't come back.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thanks for the comments. Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge because you have people that come in with different expectations. One consistent change over the years that has made me very happy is that when we opened in the 90s, the crowd that I mentioned that was going to the theaters frequently would get drinks, cocktail before dinner, glass of wine with dinner. But beer, beer was for, that wasn't really something you did before the show. And over the years, that has really changed. I mean, we do probably 4 times as much house beer as we do wine, which I think is great. I mean, I like wine as much as the next person, but at the end of the day, we're still a brewery, we're still a brew pub. So we're happy when you enjoy our liquid product as well.
So when did the Brewers Art start getting the feeling that it was time to expand your business outside of the brew pub and into distribution?
That actually came in several stages. When we opened in 96, we had a very small we only had a handful of fermenters and bright beer tanks. So for the first 4 years that we were open, we served almost exclusively here on the premises. In the early 2000s, we took kind of a leap forward on the draft production and expanded our fermentation capacity by 4-fold. The brew house itself, the brew length, we weren't really in a position to change because if you know where the brew house is in our location, it's kind of in a spot where it's never going to move, and we're never going to be able to take it out of there and put in a new one without enormous expense. So we opted to expand draft production by expanding fermentation space, including getting some more double fermenters and so on. And within a few years of doing that, we reached a point where we were serving about half of our product here at the pub and about half to outside on-premise locations via wholesale. By about 2006, we thought we'd pursue some contract brewing, and that was kind of the logical next step. As I mentioned, we're in a historic building with very limited space, so getting our own canning line or bottling line wasn't really in the cards because there's was no room to put anything like that. But at the time, this must have been around 2006, I came to the realization that Brian O'Reilly at Sly Fox up in, it was then still in Royersford, Pennsylvania, was making beer for Phil Markowski at Southampton. And, Phil Markowski is the guy who wrote the book on farmhouse ales. And I thought, well, if they're making beer for Phil, gee, I should see if Brian would be willing to do something for us. So we started doing some contract brewing with them, and started with 750s, cork and cage finish, a little fancier. We could sell them on premise as well. And by about 2008, I think it was 2008, 2009, the folks at Sly Fox suggested, look, why don't you let us try to can some of your beer for you? And at the time, there was still this huge stigma about canned beer, which probably seems completely bizarre and foreign to anybody who is into craft beer now. But at the time, I was like, whoa, cans, you're really affiliating yourself with sort of a lesser product if you do cans. But we knew that Sly Fox was doing great cans with their product. They had a good relationship with a can manufacturer. So we started pursuing some canning, and we've been very happy with that relationship. About 4 years ago or so, we expanded our contract relationship to Oliver's as well. They opened their production facility up on Shannon Drive here in the city, and they are in a position to do shorter runs of seasonals, things that we can play around with a little bit more. When we do a production run with Sly Fox, it's a significant amount of beer. So we stick to the flagships there and work with Oliver's to do some contract brewing. And it's been a healthy relationship. It's been a really, really great relationship with both breweries. They both make high quality product, and I'm really pleased with being able to wholesale the canned product throughout the state and somewhat in DC and the Philly area too. Jim, I'm sorry, I can't hear you at the moment.
Sorry, I had a little bit of a technical difficulty there.
Got it. Okay, well, you're back.
I'm glad you brought up the point about the kind of the feeling of stigma around canned craft beer, because I was going to ask, you kind of maybe not set a trend, but you were an early adopter of canned beer for not only the Maryland craft beer scene, but also, I would say, for American-made Belgian beer.
Yeah, I guess I was. I didn't really think about it much, but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure if there was a whole lot of canned beer around from Maryland. It wasn't long after that I think Hugh at Heavy Seas and the folks at Flying Dog started canning as well. But yeah, even in Pennsylvania, there just weren't that many folks that were doing the cans, and I think it was just happenstance that we ran into Sly Fox and we're working with them, and they were like, look, cans aren't terrible. Give it a shot. And I remember we had a can kickoff where we did the side-by-side, resurrection from the can and from the draft line. And it was kind of like, this is all right. This is actually going to work out pretty well. And, there are, of course, pros and cons about canning. I mean, there are the discussions about, whether it's environmentally more sound than bottles. And there's certainly a lot of really compelling arguments there. Of course, there are some folks that will point out that aluminum production also has its issues, I guess. But overall, it just seemed like a really, really good way to go. And people embraced it. This is kind of in the same rhythm of people embracing the Abbey Double as our flagship. They really embraced the canned beer, and it's been doing quite well.
That's really it's really great to hear that. I'm glad that there was not too much trepidation, and it's also relieving that you had a partner in Sly Fox who really was kind of on the cutting edge of some stuff with cans. If I recall, they were the first brewery in the United States to come up with the 360-degree removable top on a can. And then a few years after that, I think Boston Beer did something similar. But
right, I seem to remember that when they did the 360 can top, it wasn't legal in a number of jurisdictions around.
Really?
And I'm not sure what the reason for that was, but I have to tell you, when I had their 360 ale, and actually we had they made us a short run of Choptank with the 360 tops, and I have to say, when that whole top comes off and you're sipping from the can, all of a sudden it's empty, and you're like, how did that happen? So there's definitely something about pouring it into a glass or even sipping it from a can that with a regular opening that keeps it from disappearing too quickly.
There you go. Well, everybody's entitled to a magic trick now and then.
Indeed.
So I know you have a couple of beers that you're going to talk about this afternoon. Before we jump into that, there are a couple questions popping up and some comments. Phil Dudley is curious whether or not the Brewers Art's making any sour beers, and what food pairing options do you recommend for some sour beer?
We're not actively making any sour beers right now. We have played around with kettle sours with some success. To make a really traditional Belgian sour beer requires a lot of care and tank space and aging, and within the confines of our place, we just don't really have the luxury to do it. As far as pairing beer with sour, pairing food with sour beers, I've always felt that they were really great with something like asparagus wrapped in a cured ham, like a prosciutto or an Ardennes ham or something like that, or salads, or even certain desserts. I guess it depends on what direction of sour beer you're going in.
I always find it encouraging when people are asking about pairing and expanding that experience of dining with beer. So if you have any more pairing questions, please throw them in here.
I make no guarantees about my recommendations. Every palate is different, and what might taste great to me might be absolutely abhorrent to you.
Well, you can't argue matters of taste, but at least you can experience whether or not it works for you.
Indeed.
And Robert says that having the Brewers Art canning early was great. It allowed him to bring Brewers Art beer everywhere he could not take bottles. So that's a beautiful thing, and it sounds like some people were excited about that.
Softball, pools, things along that line, definitely. The risk of broken glass where you don't want broken glass, it pretty much disappears. So thank you.
And I think that was a big motivator in the last couple of years for a lot of breweries to consider that. We start to see that the craft beer consumer is a little bit more engaged with outdoor activity. We see a lot of cyclists. We see a lot of people who are engaged with hiking and camping, and they want craft beer to be a part of that experience. Sure. And if you can only take glass bottles or growlers, it either becomes too cumbersome or uneasy to take things in and then take them out with you. So I think that the can has definitely done a good thing for making craft more accessible.
When I lived in California in Santa Cruz, there was a ubiquitous bumper sticker that said, "Pack your trash." It's definitely a lot easier to pack your trash if you can crunch up a couple of cans and shove them in a corner of your backpack, rather than have the empty bottles that are significantly heavier than the empty cans.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about some of the beers that you have on the market right now. What's good for summer? What's got the Brewers Art logo on it that is a beer that I should be out drinking when the weather's warm?
Well, I pulled three that I tend to reach for when the weather's a little warmer. I have our Penguin Pils, I have our Choptank Rye Saison, and I have the Beasley, which is one of our flagships as well. So let me start with the Penguin Pils, classic German Pilsner that we do in collaboration with the Penguin Preservation Program at the Maryland Zoo here in Baltimore. They have one of the largest African penguin research centers. People come from all over the world to study the penguins. I told Jim earlier that when things are a little different, when we're not in the middle of a pandemic, we occasionally have a penguin come visit here with a handler, of course. People can come enjoy this beer and hang out with an African penguin. Winnie is especially good with the crowds. So this is your classic German Pilsner, made with primarily, surprise, surprise, Pilsner malt. A little bit of acidulated malt as well, and some classic German hops, a little Tettnang, a little Hallertau. This batch we made over at Oliver's this year. We use a Bavarian yeast strain that does really well with the lager, and you can see it's beautiful beer-colored beer, as it were. Got a nice classic old world, sort of almost earthy hop aroma. This reminds me of home. This reminds me of being a teenager. When I lived in Germany until I was 17, and the drinking age for beer and wine is 16. Although by the time you're 14 or 15, you're not turned away at a lot of places, for better or worse, I guess. But this just reminds me of being back in the old country, sitting in a beer garden and sipping a nice crisp German style Pilsner. Lagering was something we really kind of slowly eased our way into. We're always a little concerned about doing it in our location here. And it was actually a couple of guys out of DC who at that time had a brewery in planning who convinced us to make a lager with them, Pulaski Brewing. And the first one was a Baltic Porter, and it worked really well. So we started doing, 2 or 3 lagers a year. And now we have one on almost all the time. So it's been a nice move. I'm a fan of the lager. I mean, I'm definitely a fan of ales as much as anything, but maybe it's the German streak that makes me want to reach for something like this during the summer.
I imagine the constraints that you have with capacity there make lagering kind of specifically a nightmare in such a small brewery.
Absolutely. We do have one fermenting vessel that doesn't work all that great for some of the Belgian ales we do, but we use it for the lagering, and that really makes a huge difference. But yeah, we couldn't have more than one on at a time. It would be kind of a challenge to have the tank space for that extent of lagering.
Do you produce anything on the Bohemian Pilsner side, or do you stick primarily to the German Pils?
I guess we've made this in sort of a more Bohemian version in the past as well. My personal preference leans a little bit more toward the crisper Northern German Pilsner, but I have no objections to Bohemian Pilsners, believe me. So in addition to the Pils, we've done a rye lager. We've done a couple of different varieties of Bock. I mentioned the Baltic Porter already. So who's to say that we won't make a Bohemian Pilsner in the future?
Awesome. And my last question about the Penguin Pils. Well, I may have 2 because I really would like to learn a little bit more about the collaboration. But recipe-wise, you mentioned acidulated malt in the Pilsner. I hadn't heard of that. Is that to help with kind of affecting that crisp finish?
It definitely adds a little bit to the crisp finish. Interestingly enough, the German word for it is Sauermalz, which pretty much means sour malt. Although there's nothing really distinctively sour about the beer when you drink it. It might give just a little bit of that crisp acidity that would add a little something to it, and not just use straight Pilsner malt, which would be sort of I guess the logical thing.
So how did the collaboration with the zoo come about?
That was actually something that our wholesaler orchestrated. They were the wholesaler, our local wholesaler in Baltimore, Bond Distributing, had been approached by the zoo about getting a beer made, and they turned around to us and said, well, you're here in the city, and we think that you would be a really good partner for the zoo. And at the time when we first made this beer, my daughter was still a good bit younger and still enjoyed doing things like going to the zoo. So we thought, hey, why not? That's it sounds like it could be a win-win for the zoo and for us. And they were quite happy with the beer. They pour it at their stands when they're open. And we're, of course, happy to support the research they do. They really are becoming a zoo that does more and more research, which is sort of the more current trend in zoos. It's not just a place where you go and watch animals that are kind of penned in, but a lot of them are really doing cutting edge research in preservation and extinction prevention and things along those lines. I just saw a note. Hi from Silver Spring. Hi, Silver Spring.
Pete said hello.
Hello, Pete.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And you said that there is this is a true collaboration in terms of what the beer does. So does it work to raise funds for their efforts?
It does, yeah. A portion of the proceeds from the sales do get channeled back to the zoo toward their penguin preservation efforts.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I like that tie-in, and I think that it's wonderful. I don't think we hear enough positive feedback about what a good relationship with a wholesaler can do for your opportunities as a brewery. I think that beer news for the last couple of years has been filled with stories about, this tension between the wholesale and production side of the brewing business. And I don't think enough people understand that with a good relationship, you can really build great things with a wholesaler.
Indeed. Yeah. And I feel very fortunate that we do have a very good relationship with our Baltimore area wholesaler. We've over the years, we've been through an array of wholesalers, and we ended up with our current wholesaler because the predecessors decided to quit the business, and we're selling the brands. And Bond here in Baltimore is traditionally a Miller Coors house, and they were eager to expand into the craft world at that point in time. And we met with them, and they pretty much told us everything we needed to hear and wanted to hear, and it's been a really, really healthy and positive relationship. I know that wholesalers can be sticklers from time to time, but overall, I feel very fortunate that we have cultivated a good relationship with them. Let's put it that way.
So there is a growing trend in craft beer over the last few years for breweries to collaborate. It's not so common that you see a brewery collaborating with a business that's totally not related to the brewing industry at all, but coming up with a novel way to either make a contribution or raise awareness for something. And Robert is asking if you think that there are any collaborations on the horizon, either with other breweries or with other businesses, that you'd be interested in talking about or sharing.
Well, never say never. A lot of the collaborations we've done over the years have been here, because we could do a short run of 8.5 barrels and send it out to select places. I would never rule out doing a collaboration. There's nothing in the works at the moment. There are some local folks that are doing a lot of fundraising now, like my colleagues at Union, and they're doing something for the Baltimore Restaurant Relief Fund. Because they know the industry that is so essential to them and to us is suffering right now. And, hats off to them. I'm definitely not averse to finding trying to find another outlet for this, but given the current business climate and the current everything climate, I guess, I'm going to put that on a wait and see. So never say never, but right now there's nothing firm in the works. How's that for a long-winded answer?
That's very non-committal and just vague enough to make somebody ask it again in a couple months.
Indeed.
And to that end, we were talking a little bit before we started, and you were explaining to me that based on the location of the Brewers Art right now, you have kind of opted to temporarily close the storefront of the restaurant and the brewery and not offer carryout sales from the brewery.
Right.
So I don't know if we addressed that, and I know we mentioned that we might, so I figured that was an okay time to bring that up.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that being in a historic building like we are has its pluses and minuses. One of the minuses is the logistics of the building are at times pretty impossible. And when the dictum came out, we actually decided to close about an hour before the governor closed the industry because we were worried about the public health issues. But as I was meeting with the exec chef and the general manager, we were thinking about what possible routes we could take. We thought, well, given the way the location is structured at this point in time, and given the menu that we had and kind of the logistics behind offering carryout service, we couldn't think of a really good and easy way to do it. And we're working on that because we want to ease back into being open. I'm sure everybody's sick of hearing the words "the new normal," but we're in the process of kind of figuring out how we can make the new normal work and what the new normal is going to look like. But at this point, it's been over 2 months. We haven't really had anybody in the building. I'm here today just to check the mail and make sure nothing is broken or has broken down. But I'm going to be as non-committal about the opening, I guess, and the carryout as I am about collaboration beers.
I think that's a very pragmatic approach. Every situation is a little bit different. There are some people who have the ability to just open up some side doors and have some seating right outside. I could not imagine trying to do a drive-through in the alley behind the Brewers Art. So
yeah, it's been done, but I think on a regular basis it would be pretty difficult.
Sure.
No, I've seen some people do very well with it. The other day I ran into Julie Variety. She was out on delivery, and it's they're gung ho. I mean, there was a story in the Post about I think it was in the Post about her and then the delivery that she's doing for Denizens down in Silver Spring. But yeah, we're just not really there yet. And if we get there, we get there. But right now, we're still sort of in a holding pattern.
Well, that's definitely. I think everybody can appreciate that your goals are to make sure that everyone's safe and healthy when all of this comes back.
At the end of the day, staff and customers are the health of staff and customers is paramount, I think.
So let's start talking about the second beer on your lineup. And while you're doing that, Christopher's asking a question. How did you first get into brewing, and what inspired you to get into opening the Brewers Art? We talked about kind of where the philosophy came from, but personally, what made you think that this is what Volker needs to do?
Well, I certainly was an appreciator of beer for many years before I started brewing. But in the early 90s, my friend John Mahoney and I decided to start brewing actually in his basement in a small row house over on Madison Street, which was right next to the old Kavanaugh's. I'm really dating myself here. But the home brewing was really the kind of the source for my wanting to get into brewing on a sort of a larger scale. I was working as a reference librarian at the time, and while I liked my work, I thought that I wanted to do something a little different with my life. And visiting a few breweries around the country that were doing something kind of interesting, I think probably the most influential for me, aside from the local folks here, was touring the Celis Brewery in Austin in 1993 with some friends who lived in Austin, and just thinking, hey, this guy's really doing something with these Belgian type beers. And I think I might be able to make something like that work. And the people I opened up with, we kind of had this lemonade stand idea of what we were going to do. And yay, we'll do this, and it'll be great. And I've said this before, I almost sound like a broken record, but by all rights, we should have failed because we were all ranked amateurs. But sometimes you kind of grow into running a business by necessity. I got sort of pushed over into the business management angle pretty early on, so I don't get involved much in the actual brewing process anymore. But we've had a lot of skilled people here over the years. Currently Ryan Johnson is in charge of our brewing ops, and he's doing an amazing job. So yeah, definitely from the home brewing, but I would say almost more from the beer appreciation angle.
Passion can come from anywhere, right?
Indeed. And in so many forms.
That's it.
Next up, Choptank. This is a rye saison that we first brewed for a bunch of places in downtown Cambridge. And the origin of the name was that the folks in Cambridge said that the kind of thing you do on a nice summer weekend is you grab some beers, you go out onto the river and do some fishing or what have you, and you get chop-tanked. So we made this before there was the current set of breweries or current brewery in Cambridge for some bars there, but it became popular enough here on our premises as well that we decided to turn it first into a regular summer beer, and now it's actually been canned for I think the 5th year in a row. It's very, very crushable at about 4%. It's a sort of a classic saison with our spin. There's a little rye in the saison, and there is also some citrus peel. We used to put honeysuckle in on a regular basis because there was a lot of honeysuckle that grows around Cambridge, I guess, but it's been increasingly hard to source. So we've been omitting the honeysuckle and just using the citrus peel. But this is one of my personal favorites. It's got a nice little map of the Eastern Shore, kind of surrounding the Blue Heron. So it's a nice package. And it's just very, very drinkable. Again, 4% by volume. That's the kind of thing I like to have in the summer. It's got a little haze to it. It has some wheat malt and some rye malt in it. Not an aggressively hoppy beer. We really rely on the spiciness from the yeast and also the citrus peel to give the flavor profile. Thank you. Cheers. Really nice citrusy nose. We use a Belgian saison strain for this, so you get some fruitiness that you wouldn't find at all, say, in the Pilsner. But
If memory serves, I think I've seen Choptank at a few festivals as a cask offering with some unique additions. You guys do some really great cask stuff. How is that? How's that still working? I mean, has cask beer kind of lost its luster, or what's happening there?
we did in the mid 2000s, largely under Rob Perry, who used to brew here and now brew is in charge at Red Brick Station. We used to do a cask. I think it was Cask Tuesday. So the first Tuesday of every month we did a cask. Maybe it was Thursday. And initially we got a pretty good response to it, but on premise here, for some reason, our customers don't really latch on to casks. So we went from firkins that we had to pour half out of a couple days later to pins, and it just kind of faltered, and it's really unfortunate because I love cask conditioned ale, but it's heartbreaking to put all the care into getting a cask together, maybe putting a little something extra into it, and then have people kind of look at it and say, oh, that looks really interesting, but I'll have my resurrection now, thank you. We did casks a lot for festivals because it's a little bit more of a I guess a beer aficionado crowd. We do have a lot of beer aficionados that come here, but we also have a lot of folks that just come here because we're their corner local, and they like what they like. They like their Resurrection or they like their Beasley. So sad, but
Sorry, I've got really loud thunder behind me, so I didn't want to chime in too soon. If you're tuning in from anywhere along the 270 corridor, get ready.
oh dear.
Yeah, it's coming down like cats and dogs out there.
Yeah, it's getting cloudy here, but no thunder yet. No thunderstorms, thankfully.
Yeah, I have always been curious about what the longevity of cask was going to look like in the modern craft era. I remember when SPBW was still putting on the cask event every year at Oliver's, and that was always really well attended, and people seemed to love that. And I was always amazed how many breweries were coming and showing up with casks of beer that they wanted to showcase, because you can tell that there's a passion behind it.
Indeed. Well, the SPBW is still very active in the Baltimore, Washington area. It's I think the Chesapeake Bay branch is the only one, to the best of my knowledge, in the United States. They are tireless advocates of cask beer. They have started showing up also at Denizens Cask Festival, which is a really fun festival if you're down in the DC area. But I think the logistics behind putting on a cask festival, especially in the magnitude of what they did down on Pratt Street at Oliver's, it was. I know that it was a lot of work for the folks there, and I loved going. And I loved trying the different beers, but I'm not sure if it's something that today's beer drinker is really embracing as much as they might have 10 years ago. But that might just be, man shaking his fist at cloud, grumpy old man talking.
Why is there not more cask beer? For people who are not aware, the SPBW is the Society for the Preservation of Beer from the Wood, correct?
Correct, yeah. It was initially
a hell of a name.
Yeah, it was initially an outfit out of the UK. And the name is a little bit anachronistic because even in the UK, you just don't find that many casks that are made of wood anymore.
Sure.
It's really sort of a novelty. My friend Alan Hugh who lives down in College Park, he actually has some wooden casks, and he works with some folks down in that neck of the woods and provides them with his wooden casks sometimes. But I think that logistically, it would be increasingly difficult for a lot of people to actually do that still.
And were Camera and SPBW related?
Most likely. I think SPBW predates Camera a bit, but I'm sure I don't know much about British brewing politics, so I don't know if there's friction there.
Yes,
I think Camera was really all about just having sort of maintaining the traditional pub.
Got it.
And I'm going to talk myself into a corner here. I'm going to have to defer to someone at the SPBW or Camera.
Okay.
A good person to ask about this would be Joe Gold.
Yeah,
He
I
was
may
very
actually.
active yeah,
Maybe we should conference call him
indeed.
in. So this Choptank thing, I guess it pays some homage to the river, right?
Indeed, yeah, absolutely.
And the line there is that they would go and get chop tanks, so not just getting tanks. They had to make sure
They
that
were
you got the river.
getting Choptank, yeah. Local pride. My business partner Tom Cregan grew up in Chestertown, so he always had a good connection with folks on the Eastern Shore. And he was just hanging out in Cambridge. I forget. I think it might have been an Ocean Odyssey or one of the good beer joints out there. And it just came up in conversation, so that kind of got the ball rolling, and suddenly we're making the beer.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a very serendipitous collaboration, I guess, collaborating with a city, a river, if you will.
We in the river.
Yeah.
And how are sales going with that? I think that Saison's a great approachable style for folks that are interested in expanding their knowledge of Belgian beers. I think the rye edition sounds wonderful, and you keep a very light color with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's
obviously
kind of people respond pretty well to the Saisons. I was surprised at the last Baltimore Craft Beer Festival. We had a keg of the Choptank, and people were coming back for seconds. And I thought, okay, if you're coming back for seconds at a beer festival that has hundreds of different beers, and it must have an appealing palate to it. It's not very hoppy, which I think is there are some people who say they don't like beer, and what they really mean is they don't like hops. So something like this that has a very mild hop character, but still has a lot of flavor, can be really appealing. I'm gonna have a little more.
Well, and I think you mentioned the sessionable approach to that beer being, hovering around that 4% level. You still have some really nice body there. It makes it kind of an all-around great beer to drink because it's something that finishes well. It's not going to overload the palate or be offensive, and it's great, especially in a can.
It's also fantastic with food. Going back to the pairing question earlier, this would go great with seafood, but go just as well with some grilled chicken, I think, from the grill.
Well, there you go. All right, so we've got about let's call it 15 minutes left on this one, and I think that you had one more beer in the works, and this is a beer that I really enjoy. So I'm looking forward to you talking about it.
Okay, Beasley. Long story behind this one. We started brewing it in 1997. It's a Belgian golden ale, and at the time we were kind of racking our brain about what to name this Belgian golden ale. And in Belgium they had traditional names like Duvel, the Devil, Lucifer, the Brigand, and we ended up naming it after a certain heavy metal frontman. And brewed it for quite some time under that name. And then back in 2013, we got a little legal notice. So we can't mention the person's name. Some of you might remember what the beer was named, but we thought, okay, in our legal negotiations, we said, can you give us some time to come up with a new name? And they were very gracious and said, absolutely. And we named it Beasley. And the reason we named it Beasley is that there was a bartender that started here in 1996 and worked here for 20 years. Well, at the time it was only 18 years, but he worked here for 20 years in total. And we thought, it's the ultimate thank you. We have to name this beer after this bartender, this incredibly loyal, longtime bartender. He left town for a spell and is now back and hasn't entirely exited the beer scene. He still works down at Checker Spot. Our friends down at Checker Spot from time to time. But the name hasn't changed. It's got some Pilsner malt, a little bit of flaked maize and dextrose for dryness, which is something that a lot of Belgian brewers do. We use a very specific yeast strain for this that gives a lot of nice spicy characteristic. The first time we submitted this beer to the GABF, the judge said, this isn't the wrong category. This should be in the spiced beer category. It shouldn't be in the golden ale category. And we're like, well, there's not a lick of spices in it. It all comes straight from the yeast strain that we use for this. 7.2%, so it's a little bit treacherous, not as crushable as the other two beers, which are 4.5 and 4 respectively, but still one of our flagships. You can see a nice golden color, really interesting, sort of clovey, phenolic, just just a rich, spicy nose. And then a very smooth and very, very complex finish. This for a long time was the beer that if I were coming down from the office at the end of the Brewers shifts, more often than not, I would see the Brewers drinking a Beasley or whatever it was known as before. I don't remember. So this is definitely a favorite. It's a great summer beer, maybe to be consumed with a little more caution with the higher ABV at 7.2. But I wanted to include at least one flagship, and cheers to Beasley.
Well, I think Beasley was a great choice to include, especially as we're talking about some beers that are appropriate for summer. That's a great kind of evening sipper once you've kind of settled into that grilled dinner and you're going to be sitting outside and enjoying yourself.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would drink it, on the river in the middle of the day, but
no,
it's definitely tasty at home.
I think it's interesting. Last week, actually 2 weeks ago, I spoke with Tyler from. I'm sorry, I'm having a brain fart from Hysteria Brewing.
Hysteria?
Ty and I were having a chat.
Okay.
And we were talking about this kind of slippery slope of paying too close of an homage to something that you truly appreciate with the beers that you're producing, because they had an issue in the last several months,
Right.
Treaded close to the NFL, and they were asked by obviously an organization much larger than themselves to kind of scale it back a little bit or face some legal action. And I remember when Beasley became Beasley, and the way that the Brewers Art handled that through your messaging, and it was very similar. It wasn't something where our goal was ever to step on anyone's toes. It was homage to things that we were passionate and appreciative of, and that's what got us here. And it's unfortunate that that's what happens, but people have to protect what they have to protect.
Indeed. I mean, it definitely got a little more complicated with the situation that we found ourselves in, because we had received something from this particular front man that kind of implied that maybe he thought it was okay, but then many years later, things changed. And at the end of the day, there was not very much acrimony in it. It was just sort of we'd really prefer you not do this. And we were like, well, if we don't want to be jerks, so okay, can we figure out a mutually okay way out of this that's not going to ruin us? And at the end of the day, I have to say both the person and their legal team, in part because of some prodding from our legal team also, we're pretty amenable and pretty respectful of our needs as a business. So I can't say too awful about it.
Yeah, and there has to be that mutual respect where there was no ill intent or
right,
whatever it is. And I think that story about how those Belgian stronger beers were named, I'd never heard that before, or put two and two together. I mean, you always see the characters that are used on label artwork or on the old sign. The pub signs are always very kind of tilted towards that evil character, and I'd never even thought about that.
Yeah, it was. I think the idea in Belgium was that you needed to treat them with respect, because they were ready to trick you with the easy drinking but high ABV.
Sure.
And it is what it is, I guess.
Hey, like we said, it's good to have that magic trick up your sleeve every once in a while.
Yeah.
All right, so what do you think things look like? I know you don't have a crystal ball, and I know that we're kind of talking with some good concern for how things might look over the next few months, but
yeah.
How are things looking for the Brewers Art on the horizon? Do you see yourselves expanding some new offerings into your lineup? Are seasonal beers going to be something that you're approaching more regularly and putting out into the marketplace? How does that look to you?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely want to explore doing a few new things here and there. There are certainly on the can front, there's some limitations. Getting painted cans can be a challenge and can take quite some time. So over the years, we've done either shrink wrap cans or labeled cans. And we found that the labeled cans are working out pretty well, especially on the smaller scale stuff that we're doing with Oliver's. They label their own cans. So they have all the equipment set up there, and they've been really good partners and eager to try some new fun things with us. As far as details, still ironing out some stuff, so not really ready to announce anything just yet. But keep an eye on our social media. We're kind of a 20th century place, so we're not the greatest social media folks. When I say we, I mean me. I kind of suck at it. But we do post things from time to time, and so keep your eyes peeled. We'll have some fun stuff coming out.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that personally, and I have to make a confession in front of everybody that's watching and to you. I spent a lot of time drinking Resurrection at Towson University. The Bill Bateman's there always had it on draft, and I was a very happy consumer.
I always thought it was my primary care physician for many years was at St. Joe's, and he would tell me, yeah, I've been drinking a lot of Resurrection over at Bill Bateman's. And I was like, that's great, but should I be hearing this from my doctor?
Hey, at least you know that he's not going to come to you and give you a hard time. He needs you to keep making great beer.
Thanks.
Well, Volker, it's always a pleasure. I cannot wait to see you in person and shake your hand and chat. It's been too long.
It has been a long time, Jim, and I'm looking forward to return to hopefully a safe and healthy normalcy for all of us.
Yeah. Well, everybody that's watching, please stay safe. Go check out the Brewers Art social media. Check out their website. They've got some great stuff there. If you've not been to the Brewers Art, when they reopen, make sure you make your reservations and get in there. It's a wonderful place. The food's fantastic. The environment is one of a kind, especially in Baltimore City. It's great. And the team there has always been doing a great job, and I have a lot of respect for everybody there. So thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions about what's going on with Maryland beer, check out marylandbeer.org. I said at the top of the conversation that we had some updates here with a new table showing retail options for our members. Give that a look. Reach out to your favorite brewery to find out if they're open for you to come and spend some time with them outdoors this weekend. And please just stay safe, drink great beer, and support Maryland businesses. Thank you all very much, and have a great one.
Thanks, Maryland.